History remembers victories and empires, but the true mysteries live in the shadows between the lines. From vanished armies to unsolved murders, from cursed artifacts to mysterious deaths, each of these stories left a mark no one has been able to erase. And today, we will uncover the 20 greatest mysteries of human history. Death of Alexander the Great. He traveled from the Macedonian plains to the shores of India, vanquished empires feared for generations, and at 32 became master of the world. But it all ended abruptly, not on the battlefield, but in the quiet of a palace in Babylon. In early June of the 4th century BC, Alexander, returning from yet another campaign, suddenly fell ill. First a slight fever, then a fever, loss of speech, and, a few days later, death. The emperor, known as a god, died without leaving an heir, without naming a successor, and without even having time to bid farewell to his generals. His passing has become one of the darkest mysteries in world history. Ancient sources are contradictory. Some claimed the king fell ill after a feast where he drank too much wine. Others said his illness began after a walk in the rain. But even then, many noticed strange coincidences. The symptoms were unlike those of a common fever. Alexander remained conscious for over 10 days, gradually losing strength, but not his mind. His body, according to contemporaries, did not begin to decompose even several days after his death, giving rise to rumors that he was not dead, but in a deep coma. This became the first mystery. Another, far more sinister story concerned poison. It was believed that the emperor might have been assassinated by his own confidants. After endless campaigns in which Alexander tirelessly expanded the empire's borders, the army was tired, the nobility grumbled, and the officers, once loyal, began to fear that their ruler would not hesitate even to conquer the world. The prime suspect was Antipater, the governor of Macedonia, whom the king suspected of treason. When Alexander ordered him summoned to Babylon, Antipater seemed to sense trouble and sent his son Cassander in his place. It was with his arrival that the king's illness began. Legend has it that the poison was prepared from rare herbs and delivered in a sealed mule's horn, a vessel that could not spoil the deadly substance. But this version, too, lacks evidence. Ancient chroniclers, including Plutarch and Arrian, wrote centuries apart, relaying rumors that had already become mythological. Some claimed the poison was too potent to kill slowly, meaning the disease was natural. Others saw it as the god's retribution for Alexander's hubris. He declared himself the son of Zeus and demanded worship as a deity. For the ancient world, this was sacrilege. Perhaps this is why the legend of divine retribution lived on longer than memories of the campaigns. Modern researchers offer their own theories. Some believe Alexander may have died from malaria, common in the Mesopotamian marshes. Others believe he died from typhus or pancreatitis, caused by excessive wine consumption. Another hypothesis is Guillain-Barré syndrome, a condition in which a person remains conscious but completely paralyzed. This would explain why the king's body did not decompose. He could have been alive for several days after he was presumed dead. However, the most mysterious events began after his death. Alexander's body was not sent home. His sarcophagus, by order of his confidants, was placed in a golden ark filled with honey and taken from Babylon. The column carrying his body headed for Macedonia, but en route it was intercepted by Ptolemy, the king's former comrade. He took the remains to Egypt, where he erected a magnificent mausoleum, Soma. There, Alexander rested for centuries, becoming an object of veneration for pharaohs and conquerors. But by the end of antiquity, all traces of his tomb had disappeared. To this day, no archaeologist has been able to pinpoint the exact location of the man who changed the map of the world. Each century brought a new version. Some said the sarcophagus was hidden beneath the streets of modern-day Alexandria. Others said it was taken to Rome and lost. Still others believed the body remained incorrupt, a symbol of eternal dominion. Alexander's death was not just a tragedy, but a mirror in which history saw its own uncertainty. No one knows what killed the king: poison, illness, betrayal, or time itself. But one thing is clear: when Alexander died, the world lost not just a ruler, but a myth that has yet to be unraveled. The lost Roman legions, the greatest army of the ancient world, vanished as if it had never existed. The 9th Hispanic Legion, the pride of Rome, which had endured dozens of wars, triumphed in Gaul and Britain, and subjugated tribes that trembled at the mere mention of its name, vanished without a trace. No bodies, no weapons, no graves, not a single trace. Only silence, stretching for centuries. The last mention of the legion dates back to the early 2nd century. At that time, Britain, only recently subjugated by Rome, remained a restless province. To the north, beyond the borders of civilized lands, lived the Picts, a warlike people who obeyed no one. To consolidate their authority, the 9th Legion, almost 5,000 soldiers with officers, standards, baggage train, and engineers, was sent north from York. They were to march through the mists of Scotland and suppress a rebellion among the local tribes. After this campaign, no one heard of them. Decades later, historians tried to understand what had happened. The 9th Legion no longer appeared in the official lists of the Imperial Army. It seemed as if it had simply been erased from history. Some chroniclers wrote that the unit was destroyed in an ambush. Others claimed that the legion was transferred east to Mesopotamia, where it also perished, but they found no evidence of this. Neither in Britain nor on the eastern roads of the Roman Empire have archaeologists found a single artifact to support either theory. Strange legends still linger on Britain's northern borders. Locals tell tales of Roman troops wandering the hills in the night mists. They say they can hear the clanking of metal, muffled footsteps, and the distant rumble of drums. Some believe these are the spirits of fallen legionaries who have found no peace. But perhaps the myth conceals reality, a battle so terrible that Rome chose to simply forget it. In ancient times, Rome did not forgive defeats. The loss of an entire legion was considered shameful. When Marcus Crassus's army was destroyed by the Parthians, the Senate forbade its mention in the annals. Perhaps the same was done to the 9th Legion. The empire preferred to erase the defeat rather than admit that its soldiers had disappeared into the wild northern lands where no one knew the gods of Rome. But why this particular legion? In its final years, discipline within the unit weakened. Veterans demanded land, new recruits demanded leave, and commanders argued over subordination. The 9th Legion was no longer the perfect mechanism Caesar had once boasted. One theory is that the legion mutinied, refused to obey orders, and was destroyed by its own Roman forces to conceal its disgrace. This would explain the silence of the sources and the complete absence of any mention of its demise. However, archaeology sometimes hints at something else. In the late 20th century, bricks bearing the stamp of the 9th Legion, dating to a later period, were discovered in Nijmegen, the Netherlands. This may indicate that after their defeat in Britain, its remnants were reformed and sent to the continent. Perhaps some soldiers survived and continued serving under a different name. But where then did the rest perish? Why did not a single camp, inscription, or burial remain of them? Historians still debate this. Some are certain the legion was destroyed in Scotland during a rebellion. Others believe it fell in Armenia or Iran. There's even a theory that the survivors deserted and settled among the local tribes, becoming part of their people. Old Scottish songs do indeed contain melodies reminiscent of Roman military marches, and archaeological finds include rare Roman coins buried in ground never garrisoned. But as 2,000 years ago, the answer remains shrouded in mystery. The 9th Legion vanished, as if vanished into thin air. It was a disgrace for Rome, a mystery for posterity. Its fate became a symbol of how even the mightiest armies can vanish, leaving behind only a whisper on the wind and the memory of an undefeated darkness that no one dared to enter again. The disappearance of the Roanoke colony. On the coast of what is now North Carolina, amid swamps, pine forests, and the salty Atlantic winds, lies an island whose name has become one of the most eerie symbols of American history. Roanoke is the place where the first English settlement in the New World vanished in the late 16th century. More than 100 men, women, and children vanished as if they had never existed. No bodies, no signs of a struggle, no explanation. Only one word remains, carved into a wooden post: Croatoan. And for over 400 years, this word has evoked the same feeling in everyone who hears it for the first time: anxiety and bewilderment. The story began in 1587, when English explorer John White, with the support of Sir Walter Raleigh, arrived on the east coast of North America. His goal was to establish a permanent settlement, the first English colony in the new land. More than 100 people arrived with him: artisans, farmers, families, women with children. Among them was his daughter Eleanor, pregnant with her first child, who would become the first English person born in America. The child was named Virginia, and her birth was seen as a symbol of a new era. People believed they were beginning a new life on a land where a future awaited them. But it soon became clear that this future would be short-lived. The land proved harsh, harvests meager, and relations with the native tribes tense. The colonists suffered from heat, disease, and hunger. John White, realizing that supplies were running low, decided to return to England for food. He abandoned the colony, leaving behind his family, friends, and the hope of returning in a few months. No one knew that storms, the Spanish threat, and political warfare would delay him for 3 long years. When he finally returned in 1590, Roanoke greeted him with deathly silence. The houses had been dismantled, the stockade was destroyed, and there were no signs of battle, no bones, no blood. The entire colony had vanished, as if its inhabitants had simply vanished into thin air. On one wooden post, White found a word carved with a knife: Croatoan. This was the name of a neighboring island, home to a friendly tribe. On another tree, he saw only 3 letters: Crow. A cross should have been the warning sign, but it was nowhere to be found. So the colonists had apparently left voluntarily. White wanted to head for Croatoan Island, but a sudden storm thwarted his plans. He was forced to return to England and never saw those he left behind again. From this moment began one of the most persistent mysteries of American history. Where did the 117 settlers end up, including Virginia Dare, the colony's first child? Theories abound. One of the earliest suggested that the colonists actually moved to Croatoan Island and merged with the local tribe. Later, explorers reported light-skinned Indians who spoke a mixture of English and their native tongue. Traces of pottery and metalwork that could not have been possessed by the natives were found. However, direct evidence of interbreeding has not been found. Another theory holds that the settlers perished at the hands of hostile tribes. However, the lack of evidence of a battle casts doubt on this theory. Some scholars believe that the people attempted to cross to the mainland and simply couldn't survive the journey. Hunger, disease, and storms could have killed them all. But the strangest thing is that, throughout all this time, not a single skeleton, not even a single object, has been found that definitively belongs to the Roanoke colonists. In the 17th century, English expeditions exploring the coast repeatedly heard strange stories from Native Americans about white spirits living far away, about people building houses of stone and praying to their gods. Archaeologists digging in North Carolina did indeed find fragments of European artifacts: spearheads, broken pottery, parts of muskets. All of these could have belonged to the vanished colonists. But not a single find provided a definitive answer. Over time, the story became myth. Some claimed the colony was destroyed by witches living in the swamps, others that the island was cursed. In the 19th century, a theory of mass suicide even emerged, inspired by the idea that the settlers, unable to survive, chose death. And in the 20th century, Conspiracy theorists went even further, linking Roanoke's disappearance to magnetic anomalies, time rifts, and even extraterrestrial intervention. But among all these hypotheses, there's a more realistic, quieter, almost human one. It suggests that the settlers simply ceased to be English. Cut off from the mother country, forgotten and abandoned, they could have adopted the culture of the local tribes, learned their language, married, built new homes, and changed their faith and way of life. Gradually, they ceased to be strangers, and their descendants were absorbed into the new nation long before history had time to notice their disappearance. Modern research continues. Scientists are analyzing the DNA of descendants of Native American tribes living in the southern United States and finding traces of European ancestry in their genes. However, proving that they are the descendants of Roanoke remains impossible. The site of the settlement is now an archaeological park where every inch of land has been studied down to the last grain. And yet, the key answer remains elusive. The Roanoke colony has become more than just a historical mystery for America. It's a parable of oblivion, of people abandoned and vanished without a cry, without a trace, without a farewell. Their shadows live on in chronicles and legends, and a single word, Croatoan, has become a symbol of how quickly human dreams can fade when left alone on the edge of a new world. And while the ocean roars off the Carolina coast and fog hovers over the pine groves, it seems as if the island still holds their voices, those who once believed they were creating a new homeland, but instead became part of its mystery. The secret of the Iron Mask. During the reign of Louis XIV, when France shone with the luxury of its palaces and the cruelty of its laws, in the shadow of the Bastille lived a man unknown even to those who guarded it. His face was always hidden behind an iron mask, and his name was never spoken. No one knew who he was: a criminal, a traitor, a royal relative, or a prisoner bearing a secret capable of bringing down the throne. Only one fact was certain: this man remained a prisoner for over 30 years, until death freed him from his chains and history from oblivion. It all began at the end of the 17th century, when the power of Louis XIV reached its peak. His France was a kingdom of splendor and fear, and any secret concerning the throne could cost lives. The first reliable trace of the mysterious prisoner appears in documents recording his transfer to Pignerol prison in the south of the country. He was accompanied by Captain of the Guard Bénigne d'Aubuisson, a man of impeccable loyalty. He was charged not only with guarding the prisoner, but also with keeping his identity secret under penalty of death. Official records refer to the prisoner as Monsieur Marchelier, an obviously fictitious name. Later, the prisoner was transferred from one fortress to another, to the Ile Sainte-Marguerite, then to the famous Bastille, where he died in 1703. Wherever he was held, he was kept in a separate cell. No one was allowed to see his face. He was allowed to communicate only with the guard commander, who spoke to him through a closed door. When the prisoner died, his body was buried under the name Marchelier, and all his belongings were burned. Thus was born one of Europe's most persistent mysteries. Who was the man in the Iron Mask? As early as the 18th century, the philosopher Voltaire wrote of him as the king's brother. Later, Alexandre Dumas turned this version into a legend about Louis's twin, hidden away to avoid threatening the dynasty. The story seemed too dramatic to be a lie. However, contemporary documents tell a different story. There are several hypotheses. The first is political. Some historians believe that the mask was actually occupied by Count Ercole Mattioli, an Italian diplomat who betrayed France in secret negotiations with Savoy. He was captured for treason and imprisoned without trial. However, archives show that Mattioli died before the Bastille prisoner appeared. Another theory points to Eustache d'Auger, a servant of Cardinal Mazarin, accused of treason. He was known for his talkativeness and may have known too much. Perhaps the mask was not iron but velvet and was worn only when moving, so no one would recognize the prisoner. However, this theory also doesn't explain why Dogger's case is shrouded in such secrecy. The darkest hypothesis is dynastic. According to it, the masked man was the brother of Louis XIV, the product of an illicit affair with his mother, Anne of Austria. If this had become known, the dynasty could have collapsed. So the child was hidden and then turned into a prisoner whose existence was to be utterly concealed. Contemporaries recalled that the prisoner spoke with refined politeness, knew Latin, and was adept at navigating the royal chambers. Even the guards sensed that before them was a man of noble birth. When the body of a mysterious prisoner was removed from his cell in the early 18th century, the commander of the Bastille, the Marquis de Saint-Mars, ordered the removal of everything that could reveal his identity. Clothing, furniture, pen, and paper. All were burned. The registration book contained only letters in place of his name, as if death itself were afraid to reveal the secret. 3 centuries passed, but the mystery remained. Scholars searched for documents in the Vatican archives, corresponded with descendants of French aristocrats, and analyzed reports from prison commanders, but to no avail. Every lead led to a dead end. Some researchers believe the Iron Mask wasn't permanent at all. The legend of the metal face emerged later, perhaps as a symbol of absolute submission and the loss of human form. The mask itself could have been leather or velvet, but time has transformed it into a symbol, cold, immobile, and impassive. Historians debate, but none of the theories explain why the prisoner was subjected to secrecy, measures disproportionate to his potential status. Even the most dangerous state criminals weren't kept so isolated. Some believe the prisoner's identity concerned the king himself, perhaps a secret bloodline, an illegitimate descendant, or a witness to a palace crime. Perhaps the truth was simpler. Perhaps the masked man wasn't a noble captive, but simply a symbol of power, needing to conceal its own fears. In an age where rumor could destroy an empire, secrecy became a weapon. And the darker the secret, the longer it lasted. Today, not a single stone remains in the Bastille from the cell where the prisoner was held. But the name, the Man in the Iron Mask, has endured for centuries, becoming a parable of how history protects its secrets. His life is a memory of a time when one man could be deprived of his face, and his silence became louder than all words. And until a single piece of evidence is found, the secret remains alive, like the breath behind the wall, the breath of a man whose face has forever become a symbol of the fact that state truth always wears a mask. Substitution of the Romanov family. On the night of July 16th to 17th, 1918, shots rang out in the basement of the Ipatiev house in Yekaterinburg, ending 4 centuries of Russian monarchy. Emperor Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra Fyodorovna, and their children, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Tsarevich Alexei, were declared dead. So claimed the official Bolshevik report. But just a few years later, the world began to talk about the incredible. Perhaps not all the family members had perished. Some had survived and managed to escape. And among all the stories, it was the name of the youngest daughter, Anastasia, that became the stuff of legend, giving rise to one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century. Immediately after the revolution, Russia plunged into chaos. Documents were destroyed, witnesses disappeared, and bodies were never found. In the first months after the massacre, conflicting reports began to emerge from the country. Some reports claimed the entire royal family had been executed. Others claimed only Nicholas and Alexei had been executed, with the women sent to a safe place. Rumors persisted among white officers operating in the Urals. One of the Grand Duchesses had escaped. And although no one could document this, the idea took on a life of its own. A few years after the revolution, rumors intensified. Women appeared in Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Germany claiming to be the surviving Grand Duchess. The most famous of these was Anna Anderson, found in a Berlin shelter in the 1920s after a failed suicide attempt. Her mannerisms, accent, familiarity with court customs, even the scars on her body. Everything seemed convincing. She claimed to have miraculously survived the firing squad, to have been helped by a soldier from her guard, and to have then spent a long time in hiding under assumed names. For thousands of people weary of the horrors of the revolution, Anderson's story became a ray of hope. After all, if Anastasia survived, it meant the past had not disappeared. For decades, Anna Anderson navigated a life of courtroom drama, newspapers, and controversy. Some believed her authenticity, others dismissed her as an adventurer. Romanov relatives refused to acknowledge her identity, but numerous nobles and former courtiers swore they recognized her. She knew details that would have been difficult to invent: the layout of rooms in Tsarskoye Selo, the nicknames of pets, even the phrases used by the emperor's children. But opponents claimed all this information could have been gleaned from émigré accounts. The second half of the 20th century brought new mysteries. For a long time, the Soviet archives held a report by investigator Sokolov, who investigated the murder of the royal family. His materials, taken abroad, contained contradictions. The report mentioned traces of blood and bones found in the Ganina Yama mine, but there was no evidence that all the bodies had been destroyed. Moreover, the number of remains found did not match the number of victims. This gave rise to speculation that some family members may have indeed been secretly removed. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, archaeologists discovered a burial site near Yekaterinburg. The pit contained the remains of 9 people. Judging by their age and genetic testing, they were indeed Romanovs. But 2 bodies were missing, Alexei and one of his daughters, presumably Maria or Anastasia. The discovery seemed to confirm an old legend. Even after repeated studies conducted in the 2000s, scientists continued to debate the identity. Some DNA tests pointed to a match with relatives of the imperial family, while others left doubts. And so the myth took on a new life. Historians have attempted to piece together a possible scenario. On the night the Chekists came for the family, there were several people in the house who weren't assigned to security: doctors, servants, a cook, and a footman. Perhaps some survived the chaos of the shootout. Bullets ricocheted off the diamonds sewn into the Grand Duchess's corsets, the lights were out, and the gunshots drowned out their screams. If one of the girls lost consciousness, she might have been mistaken for dead. And then, as the bodies were hastily removed, someone might have saved her, risking their own life. It sounds incredible, but it's precisely in such coincidences that legends are born. Some researchers point to the political context. After the Tsar's death, the Bolsheviks attempted to control rumors. In the first months, reports about the family's fate deliberately contradicted each other. Some newspapers claimed that Tsarina and her children were alive, while others claimed they had been executed. Perhaps this was part of a disinformation campaign designed to confuse their enemies. But if so, why did the Soviet government conceal the exact burial location for so long? Why were reports destroyed and witnesses dismissed? Today, most scholars consider the matter closed. All the Romanovs perished in Yekaterinburg. However, the public consciousness is reluctant to accept this. The legend of Anastasia's survival lives on in books, films, and plays, as if humanity is unwilling to accept the final truth. After all, the story of this family has become a symbol of a vanished world, an empire that collapsed not only under bullets, but also under the weight of its own illusions. There's another, more philosophical side to the mystery. Perhaps the legend of Anastasia's survival is a way to forgive the past itself. People always seek a ray of light in disaster, believing that somewhere in the darkness, at least one witness remains alive, capable of carrying the memory forward. So it is here. The myth of the surviving princess has transformed into hope that what remains of the empire is not only blood, but also life. When 2 more bodies were found near the main burial site in 2008, forensic examination confirmed that they were Alexei and Maria. Science had put an end to the story. But the legend persisted. People still visit the execution site, leaving flowers and candles, as if they believed death couldn't have been so silent. The mystery of the Romanov substitution isn't simply a question of who survived. It's a mirror of an era where history and myth are so intertwined that one cannot exist without the other. And perhaps that's why the question, "Is Anastasia alive?" will remain forever open. Not because it has no answer, but because humanity needs mysteries that remind us that even when it seems all is over, somewhere in the depths of time, the breath of life may always linger. The curse of the Capetian dynasty. In the 14th century, France, a land of knights, monasteries, and lavish coronations, stood on the brink of disaster. King Philip IV, nicknamed the Fair, a man of iron will and cool intellect, reigned supreme. Under his rule, France achieved political power, but it was his decisions that set in motion a chain of events that many would later call the true curse of the dynasty. It all began with a conflict between the king and the Knights Templar, the most powerful religious order in Europe, whose wealth and influence aroused the envy of even monarchs. Philip resolved to destroy them, and with them, his own destiny. The Templars were founded in the 12th century to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. Over time, the order became not only a military, but also a financial power. They owned castles, lands, ships, and treasuries. Kings borrowed from them, and popes entrusted them with the custody of their treasuries. When Philip found himself in debt after wars, he realized the only way to free himself from his obligations was to destroy his creditors. In 1307, by order of the king, all the Templars in France were arrested in a single day. They were accused of heresy, witchcraft, devil worship, and other crimes against the faith. The interrogations were conducted under torture. The Grand Master of the Order, Jacques de Molay, and his entourage were forced to confess to everything the inquisitors demanded. They later recanted their confessions, claiming that everything they said was driven out by pain. But the king had no intention of listening to excuses. In March 1314, Jacques de Molay and several other knights were burned at the stake on the Ile de la Cité, right in front of the palace windows. According to legend, as the flames engulfed his body, the Grand Master raised his eyes to heaven and uttered words that have become legendary. Pope Clement and King Philip, in a year I will summon you to the judgment seat of God. May a curse fall upon your line to the 13th generation. The curse took effect almost immediately. Pope Clement died a month after his execution, and Philip himself died by the end of the same year, falling from his horse while hunting. His death shocked the country. He was followed by his sons, Louis X, Philip V, and Charles IV. All three reigned briefly and died without male heirs. Thus ended the direct line of Capetians, which had ruled France for 3 centuries. Afterward, the country plunged into turmoil, which chroniclers would call the 100 Years' War. Contemporaries had no doubt this was punishment for the Templar bloodshed. Chronicles of the time are replete with allusions to strange illnesses, sudden deaths, and misfortunes that haunted all of Philip's descendants. Even the widows and sisters of his sons were caught up in scandals and betrayals known as the Knell Tower affair. 2 princesses were accused of adultery, their lovers executed, and their families disgraced. It seemed as if fate itself was avenging the oath the master swore at the stake. Over the years, the legend grew stronger. When a new line rose to power, the Valois, descendants of the Capets in a collateral line, they too were not spared misfortune. Rebellions, epidemics, famines, and wars erupted across the country. Chroniclers continually recalled the curse. Even 3 centuries after de Molay's execution, many believed the order's shadow still loomed over France. Some historians attempt to explain the curse differently. Perhaps the deaths of Philip's sons were simply a coincidence. Early mortality was common in that era, and the 100 Years' War was the result of complex dynastic rivalries, not mystical punishment. But fate, too, consistently destroyed everyone connected to the massacre of the Templars. Interestingly, archival documents contain accounts of many of Felipe's contemporaries experiencing genuine fear after the execution. One of his closest advisors, Nogueret, soon fell ill and died in agony. He was said to have seen the flames of a fire before him and heard the voice of Jacques de Molay. Even those who merely witnessed the trial suffered strange deaths. The Templars, destroyed by fire and sword, remained in the people's memory as martyrs. Their symbol, the Red Cross, became a sign of secrecy and retribution. In the following centuries, the order was surrounded by legends that some knights escaped and took secret knowledge with them, that they hid holy relics, including the Holy Grail, and along with them, they carried away their oath of vengeance. In modern French history, the Capitan curse has become a convenient explanation for all ills. When Louis XVI was marched to the guillotine in 1793, the crowd recalled de Molay's very words as if an ancient punishment had finally come full circle. Even Napoleon, who became the new ruler, was not immune to these illusions. He, too, fell like Philippe, blinded by power and the belief in his own immortality. Today, historians view this curse as a powerful symbol of an era when faith and fear defined everything. It became not only a religious myth, but also a political lesson. Any power built on betrayal is doomed. The story of the Capuchins reminds us that rulers who destroy their allies for personal gain sooner or later face retribution, whether it comes from heaven, the people, or history itself. Yet there's more to the legend than just a string of coincidences. It's a reminder that human cruelty doesn't disappear, even when hidden behind seals and crowns. Jacques de Molay's curse became a reflection of Europe's conscience, a disturbing reminder that any evil must sooner or later be paid for. When modern researchers enter Notre Dame Cathedral and see scorched symbols on the ancient slabs, they say they are the marks of time. But those who feel history in their hearts are certain. These are the marks of fire, the very fire in which the Master of the Templars swore his final oath. And as long as these stones stand, the curse of the Capuchins will live on, as a reminder that power and faith, when they collide, always leave behind a shadow in which even the light of kings fades. The disappearance of Amelia Earhart. In the 1930s, the sky became an arena for new heroes, and Amelia Earhart's name echoed in every home. Her smile graced magazine covers, and her flights inspired women around the world. She didn't just fly, she broke boundaries that were considered impregnable. The first woman to cross the Atlantic Ocean, the holder of numerous records, a symbol of courage and independence. And so her disappearance became not just a tragedy, but a mystery, combining glory, fear, and the abyss of uncertainty. In early summer 1937, Amelia Earhart set off on the flight that would be the crowning achievement of her career, a circumnavigation of the globe. She and her navigator, Fred Noonan, took off in a Lockheed Electra, painted silver so that the sun would reflect off its hull like a dream poised to conquer the world. They had already covered thousands of kilometers, South America, Africa, India, Indonesia. In early July, they had yet to overcome the final perilous stretch from Ley Island in New Guinea to tiny Howland Island in the Pacific Ocean. It was a flight of more than 3,000 kilometers over open water. The 2nd of July began calmly. Radio communications recorded Earhart's altitude and heading reports. But the closer the plane got to its destination, the worse the weather became. Clouds obscured the horizon, and the radio signal weakened. There was no modern radar on board, and the only means of navigation was via radio transmissions from the ship Itasca, moored off Howland Island. In the final minutes, the airwaves filled with anxiety. Amelia's voice was clear. She couldn't see the island, and her fuel was running low. The last words the radio operators heard were, "We're flying along line 157-337. Then the transmission went dead. Dozens of aircraft and U.S. Navy ships took off to search. It was the largest search operation in aviation history at the time. For 2 weeks, the ocean was combed in grids, but nothing was found. No wreckage, no fuel spills, no trace of the crew. It seemed the plane had vanished into thin air. For a country where Amelia was a national heroine, this came as a shock. President Franklin Roosevelt personally ordered the search to be extended, and her husband, publisher George Putnam, persisted for months, sending out private expeditions. All in vain. Thus began one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century. There are dozens of theories about what happened. The most obvious is a catastrophe in the ocean due to a lack of fuel. According to this theory, Earhart and Noonan simply failed to find the tiny island and crashed into the sea. But even decades later, when the ocean was studied by satellites and submersibles, the crash site was never found. Other theories were far more ominous. Immediately after World War II, a theory arose that Amelia was not just a pilot, but a participant in a reconnaissance mission. At the time, the United States was closely monitoring Japan's growing military activity in the Pacific. The flight may have been a cover for photographing military installations. According to this theory, her plane landed at a Japanese base in the Marshall Islands. The crew was captured and died in captivity. This story was supported by testimony from island residents who claimed to have seen a female pilot with short hair and fair skin wearing a prisoner's uniform. American intelligence denied these accounts, but echoes of the rumors persist to this day. There's also a rescue theory. According to it, Earhart made an emergency landing on one of the unnamed reefs of the Kiritimati archipelago, where she later died of starvation and wounds. In the 2000s, archaeologists did indeed find aluminum fragments and women's shoes from the 1930s on Nikumaroro Island. However, forensic analysis was unable to conclusively confirm their connection to the Lockheed Electra. Some historians believe the mystery of Earhart's disappearance is largely a product of the era itself. The 1930s was a time when technological progress outpaced the human body. Flying was dangerous, communications unreliable, and navigation relied on luck. But the disappearance of a woman who had become a symbol of courage became a national trauma. America refused to believe that a heroine could perish in nameless waves. Her life was a legend in itself. She grew up the daughter of a lawyer, but dreamed of the sky from childhood. At 24, she took her first flight and realized it was her destiny. When she crossed the Atlantic as a passenger in 1928, her name became known to everyone. But fame was not enough without risk. She took to the skies again, this time alone, and became the first woman to fly solo across the ocean. The press called her the Queen of the Air, and millions of women saw her as proof that boundaries exist only in the imagination. Her diaries, found after her death, are striking in their calm. There's no fear or doubt in them, only lines about the wind, the stars, and the sound of the engine. She wrote that in the sky, she felt not loneliness, but freedom. Perhaps that's why her story remains so relentless. She left without losing. Today, the search for traces of Earhart continues. Modern expeditions explore the seabed near Nikumaroro using drones and underwater robots. In 2020, researchers discovered an object resembling a Lockheed Electra at depth. But to this day, no one has confirmed that it is indeed her plane. Each new expedition serves as a reminder that the truth remains hidden beneath the waves of time and water. Amelia Earhart's disappearance is more than just a mystery. It's a symbol. She vanished into the sky she loved, leaving behind an endless horizon of questions. Some see her fate as a tragedy, others as freedom taken to the extreme. Perhaps she became part of the ocean, part of the wind, part of the legend itself. After all, sometimes the greatest journeys don't end with a return home. They continue, where the sky touches the sea and where heroes pass not into death, but into eternity. The mystery of the Amber Room. It was called the eighth wonder of the world. a hall crafted not from marble and gold, but from sunlit stone, warm as the breath of the earth. The Amber Room was more than just a work of art, but a symbol of splendor and power, a talisman of an entire era. Its panels shimmered from gold to honey, and a soft glow shone within, as if nature itself had trapped sunlight in amber. But during World War II, this wonder vanished as if it had vanished into thin air. And since then, the mystery of the Amber Room has become one of the most unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. The room's construction began in the early 18th century, commissioned by the Prussian king Frederick I. It was created by the finest masters of the time, Gottfried Wolfram, Andreas Schlüter, and Gottfried Thurnau. The work lasted for years. Baltic amber panels, gold inlays, mirrors, carvings, and paintings all fused into a single harmony in which art became almost divine. But the room's fate proved far more complex than its creators had intended. Several decades later, the Prussian king presented the Amber Room to the Russian Tsar Peter the Great as a sign of friendship. It was a diplomatic gesture, but it marked the beginning of a new journey. The room was transported to St. Petersburg, and craftsmen from the Italian court began reassembling it in the Winter Palace, and later in Tsarskoye Selo. There, in the Catherine Palace, it took on its final form, a 10-meter-long hall adorned with amber panels, carved ornaments, mosaics, and gilding. In the soft candlelight, it resembled a living sun encased within the walls. For 2 centuries, the Amber Room has survived wars, revolutions, and successive empires. But its greatest test began in the summer of 1941, when German troops approached Leningrad. Tsarskoye Selo found itself in the occupied zone. Soviet museum staff attempted to evacuate the room, but time ran out. The amber panels proved too fragile, and the first attempts to remove them began to crumble. The curators then decided to disguise the room as an ordinary room, covering the walls with paper and fabric. But the ruse was in vain. When German officers entered the palace, they immediately recognized it. After all, the Amber Room had been created in Prussia. By order of the Wehrmacht command, the room was dismantled within a few days. The panels were carefully packed into crates and shipped to Königsberg, where it was installed in the city castle and opened to the public in 1942. Photographs from the time show it restored, gleaming as before, as if war hadn't touched its beauty. But just 2 years later, it was gone. In the spring of 1945, as Soviet troops approached Königsberg, the room was dismantled and repacked. After that, all traces of it vanished. According to one version, the Amber Room burned down in the castle's cellars during a bombing raid. Another version says it was transported by train to Germany. Some claimed it was hidden in the salt mines, others that it sank along with a German ship carrying valuables. Every year, new witnesses emerged. Some saw boxes, some found fragments, and still others claimed to keep some of the panels in a private collection. But there was no evidence. In the post-war years, the search for the Amber Room became almost an obsession. Soviet expeditions combed mines, tunnels, and bunkers. In the 1970s, a report came in that some of the panels were in East Germany, but an inspection revealed nothing. In the 1980s, it was said that the amber was hidden beneath Waldensee Castle. In the 1990s, it was said that it had been taken to Kaliningrad and hidden underground. Each time, hope flickered and faded. Sometimes history has thrown up strange clues. In 1997, one of the room's mosaics was discovered in Germany. It had been kept by the son of a soldier who had helped evacuate the treasure. This confirmed that at least some of the panels had survived the war, but the whereabouts of the rest remain unknown. Modern researchers divide theories into 2 main versions. The first is tragic. The room really did perish in the fire at Königsberg Castle. High temperatures could have melted the amber to stone, destroying the masterpiece. The second is more romantic. The treasure was carried off on one of the ships that left Prussia in the spring of 1945. Among them was the Karlsruhe, which sank in the Baltic Sea off the coast of Poland. Recently, underwater archaeologists discovered its remains and fragments of boxes resembling museum containers. Perhaps there, in the darkness of the cold water, lies the Amber Room, intact but inaccessible. In the 2000s, Russia completed the reconstruction of the Amber Room in the Catherine Palace. Craftsmen worked for nearly 20 years, recreating every detail from surviving drawings and photographs. The new room opened in 2003, and when the light shines in, it seems as if the old wonder has come to life. But a copy is not an answer. It is merely a reminder of a secret that refuses to be revealed. The Amber Room has become more than just a work of art. It has become a metaphor for lost light, a symbol of how war can destroy not only life, but also beauty. Every year, archaeologists return to this story, hoping that somewhere underground or in the depths of the sea, amber still holds the reflection of the candles that burned in Tsarskoye Selo. And perhaps one day this light will flare again, a reminder that the secrets of the past live on as long as we continue to search for them. The Jack the Ripper case. It's the autumn of 1888. London is engulfed in a thick fog that creeps through the narrow streets of the East End, mingling with the smoke of factories, the smell of coal, and despair. Whitechapel is the heart of poverty and human darkness, a place where women sell their bodies for bread, where filth becomes the backdrop for every crime. And it is here, amidst dark nights and hopeless lives, that the man who will forever change the meaning of horror appears. The world will learn his name from the newspapers, Jack the Ripper. His crimes will become a symbol of the evil that lurks not in the back alleys, but within society itself. The first victim was Mary Ann Nichols. Her body was found early one morning in late August. 2 deep cuts to her neck, her stomach ripped open. A week later, the second, Annie Chapman. The same signature, precision, cold calculation, a knowledge of anatomy. London shuddered. Newspapers wrote of a devil in a top hat, a monster prowling the night. But the police, despite interrogations and raids, remained powerless. The criminal moved like a shadow, choosing his victims from among the most vulnerable, vanishing before even the streetlights could be lit. The third murder occurred at the end of September. That night, the police were expecting another blow, and it came. 2 bodies were found almost simultaneously, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. It seemed the criminal hadn't finished off one. He might have been scared off. The other was so mutilated that even seasoned detectives couldn't look at it without shuddering. A chalk inscription appeared on a nearby wall. Jews, those who will not be accused. It was hastily erased, fearing pogroms. But Jack the Ripper's signature became clearer. He was toying with society, knowing they feared him and that no one could catch him. Newspapers exploded with sensational stories. Letters signed Jack the Ripper began arriving at the Central News Office. In them, the author taunted the police, promised more murders, and described details only the criminal would know. The most famous letter was from hell. The envelope contained half a human kidney, like a message from another world. But whether these letters were genuine or written by the journalist for fame, no one knows. The 5th and final official victim was Mary Jane Kelly. She was murdered in her own room in November. It was the most horrific crime. The body was mutilated beyond recognition, the organs carefully arranged nearby as if someone were performing a horrific ritual. After this, the murders ceased. Jack the Ripper disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. Police questioned hundreds of people, followed doctors, butchers, emigrants, and sailors. There were numerous suspects, from a mad barber to the Queen's personal physician, but none were proven guilty. The lead investigator, Inspector Aberline, wrote in his reports that the perpetrator possessed anatomical knowledge and acted coolly, without a trace of panic. This suggested he might have been a doctor or medical student. Later, a theory emerged about the artist Walter Sickert, who supposedly left hidden clues in his paintings. There were theories about Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's grandson, who was hidden due to a scandal. Others said he was an émigré driven mad by poverty and loneliness. But all of this remained mere conjecture. 100 years after those events, the Ripper's name became a symbol not only of crime, but also of social ills. In London at that time, prostitution, alcoholism, and unemployment reached levels that neither the police nor the church could cope with. Newspapers turned the killer into a nightmare hero, and society into spectators, witnessing its own fear. People awaited new murders as if they were waiting for the continuation of a drama. Each new headline sold thousands of copies. Thus was born the cult of Jack the Ripper, not the man, but the image. Modern experts have attempted to use DNA analysis to solve the mystery. In the early 21st century, a handkerchief allegedly found near the body of one of the victims was analyzed. Traces of DNA were found in the fibers, matching those of a descendant of Polish émigré Aaron Kosminski, a barber who was already considered a suspect. Many believed the mystery solved, but it later emerged that the samples may have been contaminated and the analysis incomplete. Thus the legend lived on. Why did Jack the Ripper become timeless? Perhaps because he embodied the fear hidden in every city, the abyss that lives alongside civilization. His crimes weren't just murders, but a message. They revealed that behind the glitter of the Victorian era lurks a darkness no one wants to see. And as long as this contrast exists, the Ripper's story will be repeated in new faces and new shadows. Old London is no longer the same. The fog has long since cleared, the streets are bathed in neon, but Whitechapel still hosts evening tours. People walk the same narrow alleys where the man who left horror in his wake once walked. The guide stops at an old brick wall, points out the spot where the last victim was found, and whispers, "He was here." And everyone who hears these words feels a strange sensation, as if time hasn't passed, as if Jack's footsteps still echo somewhere behind them. Perhaps Jack the Ripper never existed as a single man. Perhaps it was a myth created by fear and chaos. But the power of legend proved greater than any truth. And as long as cities exist where light battles shadow and wealth coexists with poverty, the echo of his name will live in every alley, a quiet, icy whisper, a reminder that evil never disappears. It simply waits for someone to turn their back on it again. Library of Ivan the Terrible. They say that hidden underground, where the cold air of Moscow's cellars flows, lies a hall where time stands still. Along the walls stand cabinets lined with ancient volumes, their pages cracked but unbroken. They contain texts that have vanished from history. Ancient Greek manuscripts, Byzantine chronicles, scrolls from the Library of Alexandria, thought to have been burned. This myth has haunted Russia for 5 centuries. The Library of Ivan the Terrible is a secret believed in by archaeologists, monks, czars, and revolutionaries, but which no one has ever seen. The story begins in the mid-16th century, when the Muscovite Tsar Ivan Vasilievich, known for his cruelty and intelligence, began collecting rare books. According to chronicles, part of the collection was inherited from his grandmother, the Byzantine princess Sophia Palaiologina, wife of Ivan III. She brought with her to Moscow after the fall of Constantinople a convoy containing, according to legend, chests of ancient manuscripts. These books were believed to have been rescued from Byzantium, where they had been preserved for centuries in monasteries and palaces. Ivan the Terrible, inheriting this gift, ordered the text translated into Slavic and hidden in a special room, an underground book depository known as Libreia. Even then, the library was surrounded by legends. It was said to contain treatises by Aristotle, works by Homer, and even books written before the flood. Some believed they contained secret knowledge about the nature of power and immortality. Others, a collection of heresies capable of destroying the soul. Ivan treated it with fanatical caution. Only a few trusted scribes were allowed access, and the entrance was sealed with the Tsar's personal seal. After Ivan the Terrible's death, the library disappeared from the annals. His son, Fyodor, inherited the throne but showed no interest in books. When the time of troubles descended on the country, all traces of Liberia vanished. Moscow was plundered, burned, and rebuilt. No one knew whether the books were carried off or hidden deeper. The search first began under Peter the Great. The emperor, passionate about science, commissioned archaeologists to explore the Kremlin's dungeons. The work was carried out secretly, but to no avail. It was said that ancient passages were discovered leading to stone-block doors, but attempts to open the vaults caused the walls to collapse. Since then, each century has brought new seekers. In the 19th century, archaeologists, monks, and even writers searched for the library. Alexander Sumarokov wrote that as a child he heard stories of vaults of books where not a single light was on. During the Soviet years, the search resumed with renewed vigor. In the 1930s, archaeologist Ignatius Stiletsky received permission to excavate beneath the Kremlin. He was certain he had found an entrance, an ancient tunnel beneath the Tenitskaya Tower. Work continued for a decade, but the outbreak of war brought everything to a halt. Stiletsky's documents later disappeared, and the site where he had excavated was filled in. After the war, the topic was revisited repeatedly. Each time, the story was the same. Traces exist, but no proof. But why does this legend persist so stubbornly? Perhaps because it's associated with the name of a czar whose personality was itself a contradiction. Ivan the Terrible was an educated man. He knew Greek and Latin and enjoyed corresponding with European scholars. He saw knowledge as a power that needed to be controlled. If the library existed, it could have contained texts contradicting church dogma, descriptions of ancient worlds, maps, and secret treatises on alchemy. For medieval Rus, such books would have been dangerous. Modern historians are trying to separate myth from fact. The Vatican archives do contain references to manuscripts being sent to Moscow during the reign of Sophia Paleologina. Some 17th century sources mention the library among the royal secrets, and letters from foreigners who visited the court of Ivan the Terrible contain descriptions of a room with Latin and Greek books covered in gold. But not a single piece of material evidence, not a fragment of parchment, not a book cover, has been found. Sometimes discoveries give hope. In the 20th century, ancient niches and tunnels leading downwards were discovered during restoration work on the Kremlin grounds. One worker reported seeing a vaulted hall with chests, but the passage was quickly sealed. Archaeologists believe that Moscow's underground levels have still not been fully explored. Some are buried, others are buried beneath modern buildings. Perhaps somewhere there, amidst the darkness and dust, lie books touched by the hands of Byzantine monks and royal scribes. Another version holds that the library was destroyed by Ivan the Terrible himself before his death. He feared the knowledge would fall into the hands of enemies or evil spirits. According to one chronicle, he ordered the chests buried in a dungeon beneath St. Basil's Cathedral, and the entrance sealed with lead. This story sounds like a legend, but it is precisely such legends that endure for centuries because they contain fear and a desire to believe in miracles. Today, the search continues. Scientists are examining old Kremlin plans, analyzing letters, and comparing topography. But the deeper they dig, the deeper the mystery becomes. After all, even if the library hasn't been found, it already exists, in memory, in books, in the imagination. Ivan the Terrible's library has become a metaphor for history itself, how knowledge can be simultaneously saved and lost. Some consider it a symbol of enlightenment, others a symbol of secret power. It may never have existed, but its concept, greatness locked underground, has become a reflection of the human dream of knowledge waiting to be discovered. And perhaps somewhere beneath the vaults of Moscow, a hall filled with silence still stands. There, beneath the dust of centuries, sleep books written by hands long since lost to memory. And if they are ever found, they will change not only history, but the very understanding of power, the power of words that have outlived czars and empires. Kennedy assassination, November 22, 1963, Dallas, Texas. The day began sunny and calm. Clear skies, a light breeze, and a crowd of smiling people lining the streets. President John Fitzgerald Kennedy rode in an open car through Dealey Plaza, his wife Jacqueline at his side, and Texas Governor John Connally behind him. It was a campaign tour, and the air was thick with confidence, as if the country had entered a new era. And then shots rang out. 1, 2, 3. The world stood still, and America lost forever not only its president, but also the belief that truth always has one face. Kennedy was fatally wounded in the head, and the governor was seriously wounded in the chest. The car, tires screeching, raced to the nearest hospital, but doctors merely pronounced him dead. A few minutes later, the announcement came over the radio, and a silence akin to mourning fell on the streets of the United States. Millions of people wept in front of their televisions, unable to believe that the young, charming leader whose smile had become the symbol of an entire generation was no longer alive. But almost immediately, along with the shock, came the question, who shot? An hour after the assassination attempt, police arrested a man named Lee Harvey Oswald, a former Marine and émigré who had lived in the Soviet Union for several years. He was found in a movie theater, unarmed, confused, but calm. A Mannlicher Carcano rifle and fingerprints were found in his apartment. Investigators believe he fired 3 shots in 6 seconds from a 6th-floor window of the Texas School Book Depository, where he worked. An official commission, later called the Warren Commission, found Oswald the sole killer. But from that moment on, a different story began, one in which every fact raises more doubts than answers. The first discrepancy is the impossible accuracy. Even experienced marksmen later couldn't replicate the result. Oswald allegedly hit a moving car twice out of 3 times with a simple rifle, unsupported, at a distance of over 80 meters. The second is the mysterious magic projectile, which, according to the official version, passed through Kennedy's body, then through the governor's, leaving 7 wounds, but remained almost intact. Ballistics experts still debate this. 2 days after his arrest, Oswald was scheduled to be transferred to the county jail. But as he was being led down the hallway, nightclub owner Jack Ruby emerged from the crowd and fired point blank. The suspect died before the eyes of hundreds of journalists. Thus, the man who might have told the truth vanished. This became fertile ground for dozens of theories. Some are convinced Oswald was merely a figurehead. His story of traveling to the Soviet Union, returning to the United States, and having strange contacts with émigrés seems suspicious. He may have been working for intelligence agencies, Soviet, American, or both. Others believe the CIA was behind the assassination, fearing Kennedy was too soft on Cuba and the USSR. Another theory suggests the Mafia was taking revenge for the presidential administration's attempt to destroy their business. Another theory involves Vice President Lyndon Johnson, whose political future depended on Kennedy's assassination. Films, photographs, and eyewitness accounts only fueled doubts. The most famous video, the Zapruder film, shows the moment the shot was fired, and it shows the president's head jerking back, though the shot should have come from behind. Some experts are certain a second shooter stood on the hill, behind the fence, and fired almost simultaneously. If so, it would suggest the assassination attempt was a premeditated plot. In the 1960s, society demanded the truth, but investigations only multiplied the questions. In the 1970s, a new congressional committee acknowledged a likely conspiracy, though no concrete evidence was found. In the 1990s, some CIA and FBI archives were declassified, but even there, they remained full of contradictions. The only thing known about some documents in the Kennedy case is that they are kept in sealed packages and will not be opened until the end of the 21st century. Why did Kennedy's death shock people so much? Because it was a blow to faith in the transparency of government. Kennedy had become a symbol of youth, reform, and hope. His assassination demonstrated that even the brightest ideals can be shattered by a shot whose origins were never explained. It combined fear of the state, the shadow of the Cold War, and the suspicion that other forces were at work behind the scenes. Jacqueline Kennedy, who sat next to him, avoided speaking of that day for the rest of her life. She would say only one thing: "I turned to collect his head." These words became a national anguish. The city of Dallas has lived with that shadow ever since. A cross marks the spot where the gunshot occurred, and the rifle still sits in the museum on the 6th floor. Thousands of people come here, and each one, looking out onto the street, asks the same question: who did it and why? There's no answer. Perhaps it no longer exists. John F. Kennedy's assassination marked the moment when the history of the 20th century changed course. From that day on, America ceased to be naive. Everything that followed, Vietnam, the protests, the distrust of authority, grew from that second when the gunshot pierced the silence over Dealey Plaza. And while the world searches for answers, the bullet that killed the president still flies through time. A reminder that history holds mysteries not meant to be solved. Manwit Tamama Shud, the first half of December 1948, Somerton Beach, near the Australian city of Adelaide. It's early morning. Fishermen see a man sitting by a stone wall, neatly dressed, in a jacket and polished shoes. He appears to be resting, gazing out to sea. But as the sun rises, it becomes clear. He's dead. His posture is calm. His hands are folded, his face unmarked. The police arrive and find no blood or signs of a struggle. There are no documents, no identification marks, not even clothing tags, all carefully cut away. Thus begins one of the most mysterious cases of the 20th century, which would later be known as the Tamama Shud case. A search of his pockets revealed only a few items: a comb, a bus ticket, a pack of gum, a half-empty cigarette, and an unusual scrap of paper with printed text. It bore just two words: Tamam Shud, which translates from Persian as end or completed. The paper appeared to have been torn from a book. These words raised not only questions about meaning, but also the feeling that the death was not accidental, but planned. Pathologists recorded unusual findings. The stomach contained traces of a rare poison, odorless and virtually undetectable by standard methods. It causes respiratory paralysis, leaving a placid expression on the face. Given the cleanliness of the body and the absence of signs of violence, suicide seemed possible, but even that didn't explain the substance's origin. No vial or traces of poison ingestion were found. The body remained anonymous. A few days later, a suitcase abandoned shortly before the man's death was found in a storage locker at the station. Inside were neatly folded items: shirts, pajamas, shaving kit, again without a single label. 11 buttons, a strange thread not sold in Australia, and a scrap of paper with a rare font that matched the one found in the dead man's pocket. The trail led to a book, The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of philosophical poems. A copy was found in the possession of a local resident who had the book lying in the back seat of his car. The last page had been torn out, and it was from this page, as it turned out, that the fragment with the inscription Tamam Shud had been cut out. Pencil marks were found in the margins of the book, a strange set of letters and symbols resembling a cipher. Neither Army cryptographers nor intelligence officers were able to decipher it. The case was surrounded by mysteries. Physiognomy experts determined that the man was no older than 45, in excellent physical condition, with well-groomed hands and unusually shaped calf muscles, like those of someone accustomed to dancing or drill. He may have been a soldier, a spy, or an athlete. The marks on his boots indicated a habit of walking a lot. But no database, neither in Australia nor in neighboring countries, produced a match. The only lead was a young woman named Jessica Thompson, who lived nearby. When investigators showed her a photograph of the dead man, she, according to the report, turned pale and nearly fainted. But she claimed she didn't know him. A copy of the same book as the man's was found in her home. On the back was a phone number linked to her address. The woman steadfastly denied any connection. She later married and lived a long life, but avoided speaking about the case until her death. Some believe the man from Tamam Shud was a Soviet spy. After World War II, Australia truly became a playground for intelligence games. The chemical poison, the lack of documents, the perfect demeanor, all pointed to a professional. But why would he have a message from a Persian poet whose verses spoke of fate and the acceptance of one's end? Perhaps it was a personal symbol, a sign that a mission had been completed, or one's life had been ended by order. Another theory is romantic. The unknown man may have been in love with Jessica Thompson, and his death a desperate act after a breakup. Her son, born shortly after the events, surprisingly had a rare ear anomaly matching the one found on the dead man. Geneticists later suggested they might have been related, but this was never proven. The body was buried without a name. A plaque was placed on the grave. Here lies the unknown man found on Somerton Beach. Since then, his grave has become a place of pilgrimage. Journalists, cryptographers, historians, even science fiction writers have come to this hill to uncover the mystery. In 2017, scientists received permission to exhume the body. Using modern technology, they were able to extract DNA from the hair. After years of comparisons and genetic analysis, a name was announced in 2022. Carl Webb, an engineer from Melbourne who disappeared in the late 1940s. But even this didn't solve the mystery. Why did he end up in another city under a false identity? Why did he choose a poison they couldn't identify? And why were there no signs of a struggle on his body? The words of Tamam Shud remain emblematic of this story. They sound like an ending written by a man who decided to leave without explanation. But perhaps they contain not an ending, but a key, a message no one has been able to decipher. After all, every attempt to unravel the mystery only deepens it. Today, the case of the Tamam Shud man is more than just a criminal mystery. It's a parable about the inscrutable nature of the human soul, about how even in the age of technology, a mystery can persist that defies both science and logic. Small shell fragments are still found in the sand of Somerton Beach, among which amber glass sometimes glistens. A reminder of a man whose end was written in two words that have become an eternal enigma. The end is perfect. The Curse of Tutankhamun. In the winter of 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter stood in a narrow corridor beneath the sands of the Valley of the Kings, unable to believe his eyes. Before him lay a sealed door covered in the seals of the pharaohs. With each strike of his pick, centuries-old dust rose into the air, as if coming to life. When the workers removed the final layer, Carter peered into the dark opening, and his companion, Lord Carnarvon, asked what he saw. "Yes, miracles," the archaeologist replied. Thus, for the first time in thousands of years, humanity saw the intact tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. But with this discovery came a series of deaths, illnesses, and coincidences that gave rise to the legend of a curse that lives on to this day. The tomb seemed frozen in time. Gold, inlaid sarcophagi, chariots, statues, the mask of the young king, everything was preserved, as if the pharaoh had merely fallen asleep. But just a few months after the discovery, strange things began to happen. The first death occurred to Carnarvon himself. He was bitten by a mosquito. The wound festered, became infected, and died of blood poisoning. That night, according to newspaper reports, the lights suddenly went out throughout Cairo, and his dog, who had remained in England, howled and fell dead at the same moment. Coincidence or not, this was the beginning of panic. Then the expedition's secretary died. Then came the team member who opened the sarcophagus. One of the project's financiers died under strange circumstances in Paris. Another archaeologist suddenly fell ill and died a year later. Newspapers abounded with rumors speaking of the Pharaoh's revenge and spirits guarding the peace of the dead. A new phrase swept the world: the mummy's curse. Among the objects found was indeed a tablet with the inscription, "Death befalls anyone who disturbs the king's peace." Carter denied its existence, but the myth lived on. People saw a pattern, even though statistics showed that most of the excavation participants lived for many years. Carter himself died 16 years later. But the public imagination no longer needed proof. It created a story in which the ancient gods punished those who intruded on eternity for their insolence. Scientists tried to explain the strange deaths. Some suggested that mold spores, ancient fungi that produce toxins, preserved in the tomb were the cause. Others believed the coincidences were natural. The expedition included dozens of people, and some were bound to die over the years. But the myth of a curse proved stronger than logic. Tutankhamun was not a great ruler in life. He ascended the throne as a teenager, reigned briefly, and died at around 19. But his death made him a symbol. His tomb is the only one found in the Valley of the Kings that was largely unlooted. For the Egyptians, it became proof of the power of their ancient gods. For Europeans, it was a reminder that there are boundaries that must not be crossed. Over time, interest in the curse became a cultural phenomenon. It was mentioned in books, films, and radio broadcasts. People working with Egyptian artifacts did indeed report headaches, sudden fainting spells, and strange dreams. Psychologists have an explanation: the power of suggestion. But does this negate the feeling that ancient texts sometimes speak to us seriously? In the mid-20th century, when Tutankhamun's mummy was on display in London, unexpected events occurred again. One museum employee died of a stroke, another lost consciousness while installing the sarcophagus. The tabloid press once again raised the curse. However, the real secret may have been deeper. Carter's notes mention the discovery of secret passages, which he did not explore to avoid destroying the walls. Perhaps these were the hidden texts warning against disturbing the pharaoh's peace. Some Egyptologists argue that the curse is not a threat, but a protection created to maintain ritual order. Pharaohs believed that if anyone disturbed their tomb, the balance between life and death would be disrupted. Tutankhamun became the face of ancient Egypt. His golden mask is a symbol of eternity, a gaze from the past that seems to watch over anyone who dares to peer into the mystery. And perhaps this is precisely the power of the curse, not in its destruction, but in its eternal presence. It reminds us that everything created by hand sooner or later turns to dust, but that which is created by faith lives forever. Today, thousands of tourists stand before the display case containing the young king's sarcophagus at the Cairo Museum. They see the face frozen in repose and think it's just history. But everyone feels a slight chill, as if the air around them is slightly denser than it should be. It's the breath of time, a reminder that the mystery has not faded. Tutankhamun's curse isn't about death. It's about the hubris of a man who thought he could own eternity. And perhaps that's why it still lives on, because we continue to look at the ancient king's gold and seek a reflection of ourselves in it, forgetting that eternity abhors touch. Boston Museum robbery. On the spring morning of March 18, 1990, Boston was still cold. Silence reigned in Isabella Stewart Gardner's vast mansion, now converted into a museum. During the night, while the city slept, two men in police uniforms drove up to the gates. They rang the bell, identified themselves as officers, and claimed to be responding to a call. The guards on duty, disregarding instructions, let them in. A few minutes later, surveillance footage showed them bound and locked in the basement. The strangers were left alone in the building housing paintings by Vermeer, Rembrandt, Degas, and Manet. 81 minutes later, the museum had lost 15 paintings worth over $500 million. This crime will forever be known as the largest art theft in history. When museum staff entered the building that morning, they found chaos. Empty frames hung on the walls like amputations. Rembrandt's Storm on the Sea of Galilee, the artist's only maritime scene, had been cut from its frame with a knife. Gone were Vermeer's Concert, drawings by Degas, a bronze eagle from Napoleon's standard, miniatures, flags, and a rare Chinese cup. The thieves acted with confidence, as if they knew every room, every corridor. They didn't take everything, but selected what was of particular value. However, strangely enough, there were paintings in the hall worth far more than the stolen ones, yet they were left untouched. The investigation began immediately. Police questioned all employees, neighbors, and collectors. Suspicion fell on everyone, from local thieves to international mafia groups. But evidence disappeared one after another. The internal security systems were outdated, fingerprints were not found, and the cameras captured only silhouettes. No one knew how the criminals had escaped the city without leaving a trace. The Federal Bureau of Investigation set a reward, first $1 million, then $5 million, then $10 million. Advertisements were posted all over the world. But time passed, and not a single piece surfaced at auction. Stolen art usually resurfaces sooner or later. Owners can't keep it forever. They look for a way to sell it. Here, silence. It seemed the paintings had simply vanished. Over the years, dozens of theories have emerged. One theory is that the Italian mafia was behind the theft, using the paintings as collateral for arms and drug deals. Another claims it was the work of a collector seeking to create his own museum in the shadows. Some claim the crime was ordered by a wealthy art connoisseur who wanted to own masterpieces no one knew about. This theory was supported by the cold precision of their actions. The robbers knew which paintings to take and which to leave behind. One of the most intriguing theories involves a Boston crime syndicate that included legendary gangster James Whitey Bulger. He denied involvement but admitted to knowing who did it. However, there was no evidence. Those who could tell the truth died one by one, from bullets, disease, or simply disappeared. Sometimes hope returned. In the early 2000s, an informant reported that some of the paintings were hidden in the basement of an old house in Connecticut. The operation failed. The basement turned out to be empty. Later, another source spoke of a hiding place in Ireland, where the paintings were allegedly taken after a deal with criminals from Europe. But nothing was found there either. The most mysterious aspect of this story is the choice of the stolen works. Of the 15 pieces, 7 had little market value. Why were they taken, while the other, priceless ones, were left behind? Perhaps the robbers had a specific commission, or perhaps they made a mistake, failing to distinguish between originals and copies. There's also the theory that the theft was originally intended as a distraction, to secure one item, a true treasure, among many paintings. But what it was, no one knows. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum left empty frames on the walls. This decision was symbolic, a reminder of loss. Visitors still see these voids today, like wounds that have not healed over the decades. They walk among the silence and air where masterpieces once hung, feeling the absence grow stronger than the presence. Sometimes strange clues are found in storage, pieces of canvas, fragments of frames, dust from old paintings. Each discovery gives hope, but then disappears again from the records. Art historians estimate that if all the stolen paintings were exhibited today, their value would exceed $1 billion. But the price of secrecy is much higher. The FBI still hasn't closed the case. The $10 million reward remains on the table. The agency periodically issues statements like, "We know who was behind the theft, but the paintings haven't been found." This means that somewhere, perhaps in the basement of an old house, the attic of a mansion, or a hidden compartment behind a wall, the paintings lie dusty but intact. The Boston Museum heist isn't just a crime. It's a story of human greed and how art can become hostage to mystery. It reminded the world that even the greatest beauty can vanish overnight if someone decides it belongs not to everyone, but to themselves alone. And while empty frames hang in the halls, the city of Boston feels as if part of its soul is still imprisoned, somewhere in the darkness, where visitors' footsteps are silent and the whispers of time repeat only one thing. The paintings are waiting to be returned home. The death of Scott's expedition. The winter of 1912 at the edge of the world was merciless. The wind roared like a living creature, the ice cracked underfoot, and the sun, barely rising above the horizon, shone dimly, as if through frosted glass. Captain Robert Falcon Scott and his 4 companions stood on an endless white plain where there was no sound, no color, no escape. Before them lay the Norwegian flag, planted in the snow. That's how they realized they were too late. Amundsen had reached the South Pole first. Their own victory had turned into tragedy, and the journey back into a story that still evokes shivers. Scott was a British naval officer, a reserved man raised in a spirit of discipline and honor. His dream was to conquer the South Pole, a symbol of courage and scientific achievement. In 1910, he led an expedition on the Terra Nova. The crew included the best specialists, scientists, and mechanics, but they were trained for the journey in the same way the British Army was trained, emphasizing endurance and willpower over calculation. Scott abandoned dogs and chose ponies and sleds for transporting cargo, believing it to be more honest and reliable. But in Antarctica, this decision proved fatal. The journey to the pole took many months. The cold reached 40 degrees below zero. The ponies died one after another, and the men pulled the sleds themselves. When they finally reached their destination, silence froze on their faces. In the tent the Norwegians had abandoned lay a note from Roald Amundsen congratulating them. Victory had slipped away. Now all that remained was the way back, almost 1,000 kilometers through an icy hell. Scott's journals, later found with his body, became a document of incredible courage. He wrote of snow falling for days, of winds that tore at his tents, of comrades whose strength was waning with each passing day. Evans, a sailor with a head injury, was the first to die. His death was silent. He was followed by Lieutenant Lawrence Oates, suffering from frostbite. The night before his death, he left his tent, uttering a phrase that became legendary. "I'm just going out for a breath of fresh air." He was never seen again. The others continued on until only 3 remained: Scott, Wilson, and Borrow. They reached the food depot, but the blizzard completely buried them. The last entry in the diary is dated March 29th. The handwriting is already shaky. "I think this is the end. We held out until the end. For God's sake, take care of our families." When a search party found them 8 months later, the bodies lay side by side, covered in sleeping bags, as if they had simply fallen asleep. On Scott's chest lay notebooks, letters, and flags. Among them was a letter to his wife, words that conveyed neither fear nor despair, only calm acceptance. But the mystery of the expedition's demise remains. Why did such an experienced officer make so many mistakes? Why did he set out without dogs, without radio communications, without sufficient fuel? Some believe he was betrayed by Victorian pride, the belief that man could conquer the elements through sheer force of will. Others believe the climate played a fatal role. That year, the temperature was the lowest on record. Later, in the 20th century, fuel and food supplies were found at the site of their death, just a few kilometers from Scott's camp. Had they reached their destination, they would have survived. But the storm raged for over 10 days, making it impossible to leave their tent. Their death became a symbol not of defeat, but of human limitations. Upon their return, Britain greeted the rescuers as heroes. Buried under the snow, Scott and his companions became legends. Their diaries were published, and the captain's words were read around the world. They read not like a report, but like a testament. Life is worth fighting to the end. Over time, the debate continued. In the late 20th century, researchers conducted new analyses and concluded that the cause of death could have been not only the snowstorm, but also carbon monoxide poisoning from faulty burners. Perhaps Scott knew the end was near and simply didn't want people to suffer. However, this is impossible to prove. Today, a cross stands in Antarctica with an inscription from Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem, "To strive, to seek, to find, and never yield." It stands where the men who walked to the end, knowing they would not return, froze to death. The death of Scott's expedition is more than just a story of defeat. It's a tale of the limits of the human spirit, how pride and faith, dreams and delusions weave together into a single line leading to eternal whiteness. And perhaps it's precisely because they never returned that their names have become immortal. Where the wind still sings over the ice, it seems to carry the captain's words. We did all we could. Amber Cross of the Templars. In the early 14th century, when the fires of the Inquisition had yet to cool after the execution of Jacques de Molay, rumors began to circulate across Europe about a relic that the Knights Templar had managed to hide from the king's servants. It was called the Amber Cross, an object that supposedly contained the light of heaven and the secret of the order. It was described as a cross of golden stone, which, according to legend, contained particles of Christ's blood fused within, and at the ends were symbols known only to the masters. This cross was believed to grant power and heal, but in the hands of the unworthy, it became a source of destruction. And wherever rumors of it appeared, death and disappearances invariably followed. The first mentions of the cross appeared shortly after the Order's massacre. When the Templars were arrested, their property was confiscated, but the list of confiscated treasures was suspiciously incomplete. Nothing resembling the Order's most sacred relic was listed among the items. Historians believe that on the night of the arrests, some of the knights managed to flee Paris, taking with them something more precious than gold. According to one version, they fled to the Pyrenees. According to another, to Portugal, where the order was reborn under a different name. There, among the old monasteries, whispers began to circulate about a golden cross that shines in the darkness. 16th century travelers wrote of seeing the cross in northern Spain, in an old chapel where strange glows occurred at night. Local monks called it a reflection of the light of truth. The chapel soon burned to the ground, and from the ashes, only a charred stone resembling a piece of amber was found. People believed the relic had sunk underground. The cross later came into prominence again during the Reformation. Protestants considered it a symbol of papal heresy, while Catholics considered it proof of the sanctity of the ancient order. The Vatican archives contain letters from a bishop who claimed the amber artifact was found in northern Germany and delivered to a secret vault. But soon the ship carrying it sank during a storm off the coast of Denmark. According to legend, the skipper managed to shout that the sea was ablaze with golden light as the crate sank. In the 18th century, the story of the cross glowing from within resurfaced in Prussia. It was allegedly shown to King Frederick by a strange monk who claimed the artifact belonged to the descendants of the Knights Templar. The king ordered it hidden in the royal archives, but 2 years later the monk was found dead, and the cross had disappeared. Modern researchers have repeatedly attempted to confirm the relic's existence. Dozens of amber crosses have been preserved in museums, but none possess the described properties. However, some ancient chronicles claim that the real cross was special. It contained a tiny metal ring engraved with the Latin words, "In lumina veritas." In the light, truth. There's a theory that the amber cross wasn't a material object at all, but a symbol of secret knowledge guarded by the Templars. In ancient times, amber was considered a substance that connected the worlds of the living and the spirit world, capable of holding light. Perhaps the cross embodied the teachings that united faith and science, which the order attempted to pass on to their descendants. But if so, why were there so many deaths and disappearances associated with it? History has preserved several mysterious episodes. In the 19th century, a tomb containing a knight's sword and a fragment of amber-like stone was discovered in the French town of La Roche. 4 symbols resembling solar spirals were engraved inside. The stone disappeared from the museum a month later, and the thief was never found. A year later, the museum director died under strange circumstances, and notes about a radiance that comes in dreams were found in his home. In the 20th century, an archaeologist from Warsaw claimed to have found traces of the relic in an old Templar commandery on the Baltic coast. He wrote of seeing amber fragments in a dungeon resembling a melted cross. But a week later, the laboratory where the samples were stored burned down. The scientist refused to speak further about the discovery and soon left the country. Today, the amber cross remains a myth, embodying everything humanity fears and reveres simultaneously: faith, knowledge, and power. Perhaps it truly lies somewhere in the sands of Prussia or beneath the ruins of ancient churches. Or perhaps it never existed, and the legend is merely an echo of the idea that people always seek light, even in the darkest ages. And yet, when you enter ancient European cathedrals, where sunbeams filter through stained glass and turn to golden dust, it seems as if this light knows more about the amber cross than we do. It lives in every reflection, in every glint on the stone, reminding you that secrets don't disappear. They simply change form, waiting for someone who dares to touch them again and pay the price. Death of Napoleon. On May 5, 1821, on the remote island of St. Helena, surrounded by the frigid Atlantic Ocean, the man who changed the map of Europe died. The wind whipped gray waves toward the shore. Rain pounded the shutters of the old Longwood house, and inside, in a small room, lay Napoleon Bonaparte, former Emperor of France, an exile, a prisoner, a man whose name every army in the world knew. He lived out his final years under the care of British guards, surrounded by a few loyal officers and a doctor, complaining of abdominal pain and constant weakness. As his body cooled, the world accepted it as a natural death. But rumors soon began to circulate that the emperor had not been killed by illness but by a slow, carefully calculated poisoning. The official version claimed that Napoleon died of stomach cancer, a hereditary disease in his family. Doctors, after autopsying his body, discovered ulcers and mucosal lesions characteristic of this disease. But even then, doubts were expressed among witnesses. One officer noticed that the deceased's hair had acquired a strange greenish-gray tint and his skin had darkened, symptoms uncharacteristic of cancer. His personal physician, Francesco Antomarchi, admitted that the symptoms could also be explained by arsenic poisoning. The first serious suspicions arose in the mid-19th century when a lock of Napoleon's hair, preserved by his confidants, came into the hands of chemists. Analysis revealed a high concentration of arsenic. This meant the poison had entered the body gradually, perhaps over years. The question arose, who could have done this and why? Some researchers blamed the British. The British government feared that even on a remote island, Napoleon could inspire supporters and spark a new uprising. His correspondence was monitored, his visits were restricted, but officially getting rid of him would have been a political scandal. Slow poisoning seemed a convenient solution. However, no document confirms that London issued such an order. There's another, more personal version. Napoleon trusted his companions, but there may have been some among them who were tired of exile and dreamed of returning to France. Rumors point to his valet, Charles Saint-Denis, known as Ali. He often prepared drinks and liqueurs for the emperor. If poison was indeed added to wine or food, he may not have known he was part of a conspiracy. But it's not that simple. Hair analysis conducted in the 20th century using modern methods showed that the arsenic levels in Napoleon's samples were roughly the same as those found in most people of the time. At the time, the poison was used in paints, wallpaper, clothing, and cosmetics. The walls of the house on St. Helena were indeed covered with green wallpaper containing arsenic compounds. Combined with the humidity of the tropical climate, this released vapors that could slowly poison the breath. Therefore, his death may not have been malicious, but a tragic consequence of his surroundings. Nevertheless, many oddities remain. Napoleon himself wrote in his diary that he felt as if corroded from within. He complained of a metallic taste in his mouth, intense thirst, and hair loss, all symptoms typical of poisoning. Before his death, he demanded an autopsy and ordered the results to be conveyed to his son so he would know the truth. His words, "I am dying before my time. I was killed by English oligarchs and their mercenaries," became almost prophetic. After his death, Napoleon's body was embalmed, and when his ashes were returned to France 20 years later, witnesses claimed they were remarkably well preserved. For proponents of the poisoning theory, this was further evidence. Arsenic is known to prevent tissue decomposition. The emperor, who died of poison, seemed to preserve his body to prevent oblivion from erasing his name. But even if his death was natural, Napoleon's very history has transformed it into a myth. His defeat, exile, and agonizing illness have become a symbol of the decline of greatness, the punishment for ambition, and perhaps simply the human condition. His final letters reveal no bitterness, only weariness and regret. He wrote that he had only wanted to see France happy, but now he sees only the ocean separating him from his homeland. Today, walking beneath the dome of the Hôtel des Invalides in Paris, where Napoleon's sarcophagus rests, it's impossible to shake the feeling that a question still hovers over the tomb. Who or what killed the emperor? Illness, betrayal, political will, or fate itself, weary of his power? Perhaps the secret of Napoleon's death lies not in the poison, but in the fact that history itself abhors absolute power. He conquered almost the entire continent, but lost the battle with an invisible enemy, time, and so his death became the final act of Europe's greatest drama. The man who considered himself the creator of a new era passed away alone, surrounded by wind, sea, and the whisper of salty waves, as if the elements themselves were whispering to him. You were great, but even an empire cannot overcome the laws of decay. The Philadelphia Experiment. It's the summer of 1943. The United States is in the midst of World War II. Military laboratories are working day and night, developing new weapons and defenses. Bombers are already thundering overhead, and German U-boats are lurking in the ocean, sinking American ships. Then, rumor has it, something happened at a secret Philadelphia naval base that would later be called one of the most terrifying mysteries of the 20th century. An experiment, supposedly intended to make a ship invisible to radar, ended in a catastrophe beyond human comprehension. According to legend, the U.S. Navy was testing Project Eldridge, a destroyer equipped with powerful electromagnetic field generators. The idea seemed ingenious, to create a magnetic curtain around the vessel, making it invisible to enemy radar. Scientists allegedly based their work on principles developed by Albert Einstein himself, his unfinished, unified field theory. By bending the space around an object, light and radio waves could be forced to bypass it. In October 1943, the destroyer USS Eldridge was moored at the Philadelphia shipyard. Witnesses, sailors from nearby ships, later reported seeing a strange fog and a greenish glow appear around the ship. And then it disappeared. Completely. A few minutes later, they said, the ship flashed brightly and reappeared, but several kilometers from its original location. When the smoke cleared, terror reigned on deck. The Eldridge crew was reportedly in shock. Some sailors stood motionless, as if turned to stone, while others screamed in pain. Some were said to have been fused into the metal structures, their bodies seemingly fused with the ship's hull. Several disappeared forever, while others went insane. Several survivors later claimed to have seen a void during the experiment. the sky and sea vanished, and the ship seemed to be outside of time. The Navy officially denied that such tests had ever been conducted. Documents claimed that the destroyer Eldridge did exist, but was never based in Philadelphia, serving in the Mediterranean. All stories about teleportation and invisibility were dismissed as fiction. However, the rumors persisted. In 1954, former sailor Carl Allen, known as Carlos Allende, sent letters to the Navy detailing what he had seen. He claimed to have witnessed the ship disappear with his own eyes, and that the experiment was an attempt to apply an electromagnetic sheath based on Einstein's work. Since then, the story has grown increasingly complex. Some claimed the ship traveled not just a few kilometers, but to Norfolk, hundreds of miles away, and returned within seconds. Others claimed the experiments continued after the war, but under a top-secret classification. Rumors surfaced that the U.S. government was attempting to replicate the effect, exploring the possibility of teleportation and time travel. Skeptics explain it all simply. Electromagnetic generators could have generated a strong field capable of affecting the perception of witnesses, dizziness, optical illusions, temporary memory lapses. Perhaps the disappearance was the result of a blinding glow and smoke. The theory about the fused sailors is a product of panic and exaggeration. But what then to make of the statements of people who claim to have seen the ship disappear from afar? Some researchers believe the Philadelphia experiment was a cover for other secret developments related to radar and protecting ships from magnetic mines. Coils that created an electromagnetic field to demagnetize the hull were indeed used. Perhaps something went wrong, a flash, sparks, or a shockwave, and this gave rise to the legend. Nevertheless, the story took on mystical aspects. In the 1960s, testimonies emerged from people claiming to have encountered sailors from the Eldridge decades later, the very same ones who were supposed to have perished. They allegedly spoke of time lapses, of sometimes waking up in a different place than where they had gone to bed. The Philadelphia experiment became a symbol of how science can devolve into magic when pushed too far. It inspired books, films, and endless debate. Even in scientific circles, the question is sometimes asked, did anyone really try to manipulate space in the 1940s? After all, if the theory of relativity allows for the curvature of time and light, why not try to put it into practice? Today, official U.S. Navy archives still contain not a single line confirming the experiment. But what's strange is that some documents about the destroyer Eldridge were destroyed or classified. For historians, this only heightened doubts. And on the ship, which was handed over to Greece after the war, sailors complained of strange phenomena: compass malfunctions, sudden temperature changes, a sense of déjà vu. What really happened? Perhaps nothing. Just a mistake, a myth born of fear and war. Or perhaps that night, the American Army truly did peer into something man is not yet ready to see, into the very fabric of time. And if the ship really did disappear for a second, then where was it all that instant? Perhaps that's why, when talking about the Philadelphia experiment, scientists smile but never answer directly. Because even myths are sometimes born from something that can't be explained in words, from experiences man would rather forget. The Burnt Diary of Marilyn Monroe, August 1962. Hollywood shone like a city of glass and fire, but beneath the brightness lurked weariness and fear. Marilyn Monroe, an icon, a symbol, a woman the world both adored and misunderstood, was found dead in her home in Brentwood, California. A glass of water lay on the nightstand, sleeping pills scattered, and the telephone receiver slid to the floor. The official report read, "Probable suicide by barbiturate overdose." But almost immediately, another story began to emerge around the actress's death. The diary that vanished that same night, the secrets it contained, and the forces that can destroy even legends. Marilyn was more than just an actress. She became the icon of an entire era, a woman whose radiance dazzled. Beneath her radiance lay a fragility. She often wrote in notebooks, short notes, poems, phrases, fragments of thoughts. These notebooks knew more about her than her friends, directors, or lovers. According to those close to her, one of them, a red leather one, was her personal diary, where she recorded everything: conversations, names, impressions. Among them, journalists later claimed, may have been notes about meetings with President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert. On the night of her death, according to the police officers who were first on the scene, the diary was lying on her bedside table. But when the official investigation began a few hours later, the book was gone. One of the officers admitted to seeing a member of Robert Kennedy's entourage in the bedroom. Robert Kennedy himself, according to eyewitnesses, was indeed in Los Angeles that day, although he officially denied it. His secretary later claimed to have seen an agent carrying a red notebook and several envelopes out of the house. The newspapers were silent. All the details of the case were shrouded in a fog of uncertainty. The investigation was hasty and contradictory. The autopsy revealed strange findings. Barbiturate levels in her blood exceeded lethal levels, but there were almost no traces in her stomach, as if the pills had not been administered orally. There were other oddities, too. The bedroom door was locked from the inside, but there were no signs of withdrawal, and the phone calls Monroe made shortly before her death were not recorded. It all looked as if someone had carefully edited her final hours. In the following years, dozens of theories emerged. One is that Marilyn was killed by agents fearing information leaks. She allegedly knew too much about secret negotiations with Cuba, mafia connections, and White House political games. Her diary, some journalists claimed, contained direct quotes from conversations with the president. Another theory is that her death was a tragic accident, but someone used it to conceal evidence. Those who knew the actress closely said she changed in the weeks before her death. She quit filming, avoided the press, but seemed determined. She wrote her final sentence in her diary: "I feel like this is just the beginning." These words, later found in drafts, didn't sound like a message of despair. In the 1970s, former Los Angeles police investigator Norman Jeffries admitted to seeing documents in a case file that disappeared before the investigation was closed. Among them was an inventory of seized items, which included the entry, "A notebook with a red cover." This journal could not be recovered. All traces of it had been destroyed. Since then, the phrase, "the burnt diary," has become a symbol of this story. According to one version, the notebook was indeed burned on orders from the Secret Services. Another version holds that it was kept by a private collector and surfaced only briefly in the 1990s, when an unknown person attempted to auction off the Monroe manuscripts in Switzerland. The auction was withdrawn at the last minute. Modern researchers who have studied the case claim that evidence of substitution and interference is clear. Crime scene photographs contradict reports, and witness statements contradict police records. Everything points to someone in a position of power controlling the plot. And yet, over the decades, the mystery has lost none of its appeal. Marilyn remains a myth, and her death is the culmination of that myth. She embodied not only beauty, but also the fragility of fame. Her smile, frozen on old posters, became a reminder that behind the glitter there is always loneliness. A Los Angeles archivist once reported seeing an envelope marked "Personal MM" in the basement of an old building. Inside were pages faded with age, fragments of phrases. "They laugh when I'm silent. Everyone wants a piece, no one wants a kiss. Sometimes the voice on the phone sounds like someone else's." The authenticity of these pages has not been proven, but perhaps that is how the truth sounded. Quiet, like a whisper under the noise of flashbulbs. Marilyn Monroe's burned diary isn't just a document no one has seen. It's a metaphor for a lost voice that can never be recovered. Perhaps she truly did know too much, or perhaps she simply lived too brightly for a world that can't preserve the light. And so all that remains of her are photographs, a smile, and an empty silence around a name that still resonates like a spell. The riddle of Agafya Lykova. There's a spot on the map of Siberia where the taiga seems endless. Here, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest villages, winters last 9 months, bears come to the huts, and the rivers roar as if conversing with the wind itself. It was here, in the 1970s, that geologists accidentally discovered a family whose existence no one knew existed. They had lived in isolation for over 40 years, with no radio, no books, no contact with the outside world. They called themselves the Lykovs, descendants of old believers who fled persecution back in the 1930s. Among them was Agafya, the youngest daughter, destined to become the last witness to a life beyond time. The story began in the summer of 1978, when a group of geologists was exploring the upper reaches of the Abakan River in a remote part of Khakassia by helicopter. From the air, they spotted a small clearing with a birch bark-covered hut. This place wasn't on any map. As the scientists approached, thin, tanned men dressed in burlap emerged from the house. Their speech was archaic, replete with religious idioms, and their expressions were distrustful. Thus, for the first time, the world learned of a family that had lived for decades in complete isolation, believing humanity to be long since extinct. The family's father, Karp Lykov, took his wife and children into the taiga during Stalin's purges. They built a house, fished, grew potatoes and rye, and prayed, unaware that a different era was already unfolding around them: airplanes, atomic energy, television. The 2 eldest children died of starvation in the 1950s, and their mother of illness. By the time geologists found them, only the father and 2 daughters, Natalia and Agafya, remained alive. Geologists brought them flour, salt, and sugar, foods they'd never tasted. Agafya said she saw bread for the first time and couldn't understand how flour could produce something soft. When she first saw matches, she crossed herself, believing them to be a miracle. But despite all the help, the family refused to move. Karp Lykov said that only sin and destruction remained in the world, while God protected them in the taiga. In 1981, Karp died, and soon the others succumbed to illness. Only Agafya remained, a petite woman with gray hair and a face as weathered as tree bark. She remained where she was born, continuing her way of life, sewing clothes from canvas, lighting fires without matches, praying in Old Church Slavonic. She couldn't read newspapers, hadn't seen cities, didn't know who Lenin or Gagarin were. But when journalists came to her, Agafya would say simply, "People live wrong. They've forgotten to be grateful for every day." Scientists tried to understand how she managed to survive alone. In winter, temperatures dropped to -50 degrees Celsius. Her hut contained a tiny stove, homemade dishes, and walls patched with moss. Every year, rescuers came with offers to move, but she refused. "My parents are here, God is here," she said. Her life became a legend about a person who rejected civilization and remained part of the earth. However, Agafya Lykova's secret lies beyond her seclusion. Over the years, it became clear that she didn't seem to age like others. Her health astonished doctors. She lived for decades without medicine, medication, or vitamins. Researchers believed the secret lay in pure water, a simple diet, and a rhythm of life in harmony with nature. But Agafya herself responded differently. "I live as long as I pray." She outlived everyone who found her. Her hut became a place of pilgrimage. Journalists, monks, and governors flew to her. She received everyone with caution, offering advice and asking them not to bring unnecessary things. In recent years, volunteers and monks helped her, delivering food and medicine. But even with a helipad nearby, she never left the taiga. There's no resentment or fear in her words. When asked what she fears, she'd answer, "Only sin and the hardening of the heart." There's a quiet knowingness in her eyes, as if she's seen something modern man has long since lost. The fate of Agafya Lykova is not a mystical mystery, but a human one. She became living proof that humans can live without the world, but the world cannot live without humans. Scientists debate how it's possible to live so many years in isolation without going mad. Perhaps the answer is that she was never alone. In her world, everything breathed: the forest, the wind, the water. She spoke to them as if they were friends. Now, at over 80 years old, she still lives in the same place, in the taiga, where silence begins. And perhaps when she passes away, the last bridge between two worlds will disappear with her, the one where people measure everything in numbers, and the one where life is measured by prayer and the breath of the forest. Agafia Lykova's story reminds us that secrets aren't found in ancient ruins or old manuscripts. Sometimes a secret is a person who remains true to themselves, even when all that remains of the world is stars, fire, and snow. History is not just a chain of dates and victories, but an endless shadow of human destinies, where truth and myth are so intertwined that it's impossible to discern where one ends and the other begins. The mysteries of Alexander the Great and Napoleon, the disappearance of the Roanoke colony, and the Amber Cross, curses, experiments, lost diaries, and people who have departed the world of civilization. All these are not only mysteries of the past, but also mirrors of our present. Each of these stories speaks to the fact that humans, no matter how far they've advanced, remain creatures searching for meaning. We fear what we can't explain, but it's precisely this that keeps us alive. After all, solved mysteries cease to be a miracle, and unsolved ones remind us that time has a memory stronger than any archive. And perhaps this is precisely why we continue to seek answers where only echoes resonate: in the dust of old libraries, in the depths of the ocean, in the silence of forests, and in the very heart of the human soul.